We know freshness is really important to coffee, but tell me what you think about freshness and how much it affects the taste of coffee.
If we set aside green coffee, which does tend to fade in different ways over long periods of time, depending on how it's stored. So if we just disregard that, the freshness issue starts at the point, of course, when the coffee is roasted. Because as soon as it's roasted, we get all of these wonderful VOCs, volatile organic compounds, wafting off the bean, and along with a whole lot of carbon dioxide. I think scientists, I've seen figures of over 1,000 of different VOCs have been identified coming off the coffee. Of course, we all have a negative view of VOC or a negative connotation over VOCs because VOCs pollute the atmosphere and are difficult. I mean, when we have nail polish remover and it stinks up the bathroom, that's all VOCs. So I think of the coffee VOCs as good VOCs. As soon or almost as soon as we've roasted the coffee, we want to get those VOCs going into the cup and being brewed so we can drink and enjoy them and smell them coming off of the cup as soon as we can. And so that's the whole challenge of freshness, is to do that. There is the issue, of course, that coffee can be a little too fresh. It hasn't quieted down. The VOCs maybe aren't the right balance of delicious VOCs that we want right after the coffee's roasted. For consumers, that's no problem. It might be a problem for home roasters, but consumers, the coffee never gets to us until at least 3, 4, 5 days, even at the best. So it has plenty of time to quiet down.
Is there such a thing as too fresh coffee?
For espresso, it's too fresh, of course, because the degassing, the carbon dioxide that just pours out of the coffee as soon as it's ground. At least espresso people who should know tell me that imbalances and makes it difficult to pull a really good shot. You get more crema, but the shot is difficult. I think difficult for consistency mostly. I did tests when I was doing my book on home coffee roasting, and I think that there's a kind of a balance and completeness that settles into a coffee after a couple of days. In other words, I think it'd be exciting to taste it right after you've roasted it. A lot of people think there's a sort of a mysterious thing that happens with really freshly roasted coffee, and I can't speak to that because I'm not a mystic about coffee. I just really love it. But the short answer is the consensus says we wait 2 or 3 days. Now Italians, of course, for espresso, they like to wait sometimes a month. They let the coffee degas under a blanket of nitrogen. So oxygen is the enemy of these VOCs. So if we have bad VOCs because of the nail polish remover, we want oxygen to break them down. With the coffee, we don't want them broken down by the oxygen. The CO₂ that is part of the degassing process, along with the VOCs, that is a protective blanket. In other words, the oxygen can't get in because the CO₂ is coming out. For example, freezing coffee, the carbon dioxide and the VOCs pretty much stay in the bean. They very slowly dispel. Measuring the CO₂ is a way of confirming freshness. This is how one of the ways scientists have tried to measure freshness and the pace of staling or fading.
I know a roaster, he's on the East Coast. He said, I'm old school. I leave my coffee out overnight before I package it so that it will somewhat degas.
Oh yeah, they all do. You have to. The whole bean has to be degassed a bit short time. With commercial companies that are very responsible, they manage to do the degassing without too much loss of volatiles. The trick, of course, is to protect the coffee from losing volatiles and lose as little of the volatile components as possible. One way, of course, is to buy coffee that's been freshly roasted. This was the original solution in specialty coffee, of course. With Mr. Peet of the Peet's Coffee, he would roast the coffee and put it in bins and at his small roaster, but by the time it was used up, he'd roast more. But normally, we have to rely on bags to protect the coffee. I'm talking whole bean, of course. I think
sure.
I hope everybody who's viewing this understands that you want to grind the coffee immediately before you brew it, because as soon as you grind the coffee, all of the good VOCs start to volatilize, disappear. If that's understood, then the question is how to protect the freshness of the whole bean coffee. And the way it's normally done, of course, is through bags. We often, on the show, talk about is the difference in how the bags protect the coffee. All of the bags have a valve in the bags. And you see on the inside, this is how the valve looks on the inside. I think we're all used to finding these on our coffee bags. If this works right, it allows the CO₂ to come out through the valve.
Right.
And prevents oxygen or atmosphere, air, which has about 20% oxygen, to come back in. So that's key. All of the bags, except for the paper bags that are just filled out of a bin, all coffee bags have the valve. For instance, these two coffee bags both have valves. This is a local roaster. I just stopped by this morning and got it. High wire roaster, very nice roaster. They have a valve down here. You can barely see it. This is a Starbucks holiday blend, and this has a valve down here. So anytime you're buying coffee, unless you're buying it directly in bulk, you're going to find one of those valves. The difference is that how the coffee is packaged. For local roasters that sell quickly, within a couple of weeks after roasting, 3 weeks, maximum maybe a month, they simply put the coffee in the bag and seal it. And what happens is the coffee emits carbon dioxide, CO₂, and the CO₂ dilutes the oxygen in the bag, and you get some protection. The CO₂, we're going to test to see how much oxygen is in this bag. Most likely it'll be about 14%, less than air, which would be about 20%, but somewhat protected. So coffee in a bag like that will last fresh 2 or 3 weeks. The roaster depends on the consumer looking for a roasted on date. In this case, it was roasted December 12th. It's still very fresh, and it's protected in the bag from extreme exposure, also moisture and other things that can accelerate staling. Now, in the case of a large company like Starbucks, for example, the whole bean coffee is dropped into the bag at the same time as nitrogen is flushed. It's called nitrogen flushing. So the nitrogen displaces the oxygen, and then the coffee's dropped in, and there's usually a little bit of oxygen that remains, a little bit of air with oxygen in it remains in the bag, but the CO₂, the beans absorb it and the CO₂ displaces it. So ideally, with the nitrogen flushed bag, when we test it today, we should get 0%.
Please like and subscribe if you want to see more shows like this.